The cottage door exploded inward. Splinters of ancient weathered pine flew across the small room like shrapnel. Selena didn't scream. The sound was trapped in her throat, a knot of pure primal terror. In the space of a single stolen heartbeat, she moved, her body a fluid arc of maternal desperation. She threw herself over her son, Torin, her arms a shield, her back a wall against the world. He was small for his 6 years, huddled by the hearth where he'd been tracing patterns in the ash, and her body covered his completely. She could feel his tiny, sharp gasp against her stomach as she pressed him into the floorboards, whispering the only word that mattered. Hush. They had found them. After 7 years of looking over her shoulder, of starting at every snapped twig, of sleeping with a wood axe by her cot, the hunters had finally sniffed them out. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard them, the soft tread of booted feet, the low, guttural murmur of men who dealt in death. They weren't the king's guards. Their scent was wrong, tainted with something mercenary and cruel. These were assassins. She squeezed her eyes shut, burying her face in Torin's dark, silky hair, which smelled of wood smoke and boyish mischief. He had his father's hair, and his father's eyes. The brilliant, molten gold eyes of the Alpha King, the eyes that had condemned them. A rough hand seized her shoulder, hauling her up and away from her son. This time a scream did tear from her lungs, raw and ragged. "No! Leave him!" she thrashed, her nails finding only thick leather. A man in a dark cloak, his face hidden by a shadow-casting hood, sneered down at her. His scent was sharp, acrid, like rusted iron and cold ambition. "The whelp has the Alpha's eyes," the man rasped, his voice a dry rustle of dead leaves. Lady Alara was right. A pity. He gestured with a cruel-looking crossbow, its bolt tipped with a viscous, dark substance. Poison. Meant for a quick, untraceable kill. Torin scrambled backward, his small face a mask of terror, but his golden eyes, so like his father's, held a flicker of defiance. "Don't you touch my mother!" he shouted, his voice high and thin, but filled with a cub's nascent courage. The assassin laughed, a horrible, grating sound. "Brave little pup, your line ends here." He raised the crossbow, aiming not at Selene, but at the small, defiant boy. Time seemed to warp, to stretch and slow into a thick, syrupy agony. Selene saw the man's finger tighten on the trigger. She saw the glint of the poisoned tip. She saw her entire world, her reason for breathing, about to be extinguished. Something deep inside her, a core of power she had suppressed for 7 long years, fractured. It was a feeling like breaking ice, a sudden, violent release of pressure. Her hand, outstretched toward Torin, began to glow. A soft, pearlescent light, the color of the full moon on fresh snow, bloomed from her palm. She didn't think. She acted. She pushed that light, that energy, that last desperate piece of her soul outward. A shield of shimmering moonlight erupted between the assassin and her son. It solidified just as the crossbow fired. The poisoned bolt struck the magical barrier with a dull thud and clattered harmlessly to the floor. The assassin stared, his mouth agape beneath his hood. But the effort cost her everything. A wave of profound, soul-deep exhaustion crashed over Selene. The light in her hand flickered and died. The world swam, tilting on its axis as black spots danced in her vision. She felt her lifeblood, not her physical blood, but the very essence of her spirit, draining away as if a plug had been pulled from her soul. She collapsed to her knees, her breath coming in shallow, shuddering gasps. She had saved him. That was all that mattered. As her vision blurred and the sounds of the room faded into a distant roar, her last conscious thought was of a different night, 7 years ago, when her world had ended for the first time. The great hall had never held so many wolves. The air was thick with the scent of pine, damp earth, and anticipation. Hundreds of pack members, from the highest-ranking betas to the lowest-born omegas, stood shoulder to shoulder, their eyes fixed on the dais. Celine watched from the shadows near the kitchens, a place where a servant girl belonged. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of hope and fear. Tonight, King Alaric, the newly ascended alpha of the Black Moon Pack, would perform the rite of choosing. He would publicly claim his fated mate, the pack's Lunar. And she knew, with a certainty that was etched into her very soul, that it was her. The bond had snapped into place the moment he'd returned from the border wars a month prior. He had been walking through the lower courtyard, a grim, weary king forged in battle. She had been carrying a basket of laundry, a simple servant, invisible to most. But his eyes, those searing golden eyes, had locked onto hers across the expanse. The world had fallen away. A jolt, hot and electric, had surged through her, and a mark, like a swirling silver crescent moon, had bloomed over her hip, burning with a heat that was both pain and pleasure. She'd seen him stumble, his hand flying to his own chest as if struck. A fated mate bond, the rarest and most sacred of all connections, a sign from the moon goddess herself. In the weeks that followed, they had met in secret. Stolen moments in the royal gardens under the stars, hurried whispers in shadowed alcoves. He was magnificent, powerful, yet with her he was tender, almost reverent. He spoke of a future, of shattering the rigid caste system, of making her his queen, not because of her bloodline, but because the goddess had willed it. He had touched the burning mark on her hip, his fingers tracing its shape as he swore he would never choose another. "You are my destiny, Celine," he had whispered, his forehead pressed to hers, his scent of winter pine and cold steel wrapping around her like a promise. "My beginning and my end." And in one of those stolen, breathless nights, in a hidden chamber warmed by a roaring fire, they had sealed their clandestine union. They hadn't completed the final claiming bite, not yet. He wanted to do that in front of the pack, to show them all that love, not status, would rule his reign. Now, standing in the great hall, her hand rested protectively over her belly. It was too soon for anyone to know, but she knew. A new life, a royal heir, was growing within her, the product of their fated love. Alaric stood on the dais, looking every inch the Alpha King. He was dressed in black furs and silver, his presence so commanding it seemed to suck the very air from the room. But something was wrong. His golden eyes, usually so sharp and intelligent, were clouded, distant. He scanned the crowd, a flicker of confusion, of pained searching in his expression. His gaze passed over her, over the spot in the shadows where she stood, and there was no recognition. None. A cold dread began to seep into her bones. At his side stood Lady Alara Vanthorne, beautiful and venomous, her silver gown clinging to her perfect form. Her family was old, powerful, and ambitious. She had made her desire for the throne known since they were pups. She placed a delicate hand on Alaric's arm, leaning in to whisper something in his ear. He flinched, a subtle, almost imperceptible movement, but Celine saw it. He looked lost. "My people!" Alaric's voice boomed, but it was flat, hollow. It lacked the warmth she knew so well. "Tonight I secure the future of our pack. I honor the old ways and the strength of our great houses." He paused, and his eyes swept the crowd again, a desperate, hunted look in them. For a moment they met hers. Her heart leaped. "See me," she pleaded silently. "Remember." But then his eyes glazed over, and he turned away. "I, King Alaric of the Black Moon Pack," he declared, his voice sounding like a recitation, a line fed to him by a puppeteer. "Choose Lady Elara of House Van Thorn as my mate, as my Lunar Queen." The words struck Selene with the force of a physical blow. The air rushed from her lungs. The joyous roar of the crowd was a wave of sound that threatened to drown her. Elara smiled, a triumphant, vicious little smirk, and her eyes found Selene in the shadows. There was no mistaking the malice, the sheer, unadulterated victory in that look. Elara had won. But how? Alaric reached for Elara, his movements stiff and unnatural. As he did, Selene felt the bond, their sacred connection, tear. It wasn't a clean break. It was a violent, shredding agony that ripped through her soul. The mark on her hip erupted in excruciating pain, a burn of ice and fire that made her cry out, a sound lost in the din of celebration. She stumbled back, clutching her side, the world spinning into a vortex of pain and betrayal. He hadn't just chosen another. He had looked through her as if she were a ghost. The man who had sworn he was hers was gone, replaced by this cold, empty shell. She fled, through the kitchens, out into the cold night air, her heart shattering with every step. The only person she could think of was Marta, the pack's old healer, a woman who saw more than most. She found the wise woman in her herb-scented cottage, packing a small bag with a grim urgency. "He's been poisoned," Marta said, her voice low and grave, before Selena could even speak. "I smelled it in his wine. A complex wolfsbane compound, laced with something else. Something that attacks the mind, the memories. It targets the mate bond specifically, severs it, or clouds it enough for another to step in." Marta looked at Selena's pale, tear-streaked face, her eyes full of pity. "She did this, Elara, to force his hand." "But the bond," Selena whispered, the words like shards of glass in her throat. "It's a goddess-given thing. It can't be broken." "It can be wounded, child. Wounded so deeply the wolf can't find its way back," Marta explained, pressing the packed bag into Selena's numb hands. It was filled with dried herbs, coins, a small loaf of bread. "She will not allow you to live, not now that she has the crown. And if she ever learns you carry the true heir." The old healer didn't need to finish the sentence. "You must run," Marta urged, her hands gripping Selena's shoulders. "Run far from here. Hide yourself. Hide the child. Do not trust anyone from the pack. Elara's influence is like a rot. It will spread quickly. I will stay. I will try to find a way to help the king, to fight the poison from within." And so Selena had run. With a ghost of a king in her heart and his child in her womb, she had vanished into the wilderness, becoming a ghost herself. For 7 years, that agony had been her constant companion. The burning pain of the broken bond on her hip had eventually faded to a dull, hollow ache, a constant reminder of what she had lost. But it was a small price to pay for the new center of her universe, Torin, her son, her secret, precious, golden-eyed boy. She had endured it all for him. And now, as darkness claimed her on the dusty floor of her cottage, she feared it had all been for nothing. Meanwhile, madness reigned in the Black Moon Kingdom. For 7 years, King Alaric had been a man possessed. The days following the rite of choosing were a blur of confusion and rage. He'd woken in his royal chambers with Elara beside him, her scent of cloying perfume a violation to his senses. He felt wrong. A vast, yawning emptiness hollowed out his chest, a phantom limb amputation of the soul. He remembered standing on the dais. He remembered the words he spoke, but it was like watching another man. He did not feel like Ilara's mate. There was no bond, no connection, only a cold political alliance that felt like a cage. But there was something else. A scent. A memory of starlight and whispered promises. The phantom sensation of a soft hand in his. A name that was always on the tip of his tongue, but which dissolved like smoke whenever he tried to grasp it. He was haunted by a ghost, a woman whose face he couldn't quite recall, but whose absence was a physical torment. The bond sickness, the healers had called it, a rare side effect of a mismatched claiming. But Alaric knew, in the deepest, most animal part of his wolf, that it wasn't a mismatch. It was a theft. Someone had been stolen from him. His search began as a quiet, desperate inquiry. He questioned the castle staff, the guards, anyone who might have seen... Who? He didn't even know who he was looking for. His questions were vague, nonsensical. Have you seen a woman with eyes like the dawn? Do you know who smells of night-blooming jasmine and courage? The pack thought he was losing his mind. Ilara, his so-called queen, was quick to encourage this narrative. She would soothe him with platitudes, her touch like ice on his skin, all while whispering to the court that the king's battle-weariness had finally fractured his sanity. But the ache in his soul only grew, festering into a feral madness. The phantom bond, the one Ilara's poison had tried to sever, pulsed with a desperate, lonely signal. It was weak, frayed, but it was there, and it drove him wild. He began to tear the kingdom apart. He would ride for days on end, his royal guards struggling to keep pace, chasing a scent on the wind that no one else could smell. He would erupt in rages in the throne room, overturning tables and roaring a name that he couldn't speak, his golden eyes burning with a lunatic fire. He was no longer a king. He was a caged beast, tearing at the bars of a prison he couldn't see. He neglected his duties, his alliances crumbled, and his pack suffered under the manipulative hand of their false Lunar, Ilara, who ruled in his stead, consolidating her power with every passing day his madness grew. Only one wolf saw the truth. Brennan, his beta, an old soldier whose loyalty had been forged in the crucible of 100 battles at Alaric's side. He was older, his muzzle graying, but his eyes were sharp. He did not believe the king was mad. He believed he was heartbroken on a spiritual level. He saw Alaric clutch his chest, saw the agony in his eyes when he thought no one was looking. Brennan remembered the weeks before the choosing. He'd seen his alpha, his king, smiling for the first time since the wars ended. He'd caught glimpses of him with a dark-haired servant girl, had seen the genuine, unforced happiness on Alaric's face. And then, after the ceremony, she was gone, vanished. While Ilara whispered of healers and sanatoriums for the sick king, Brennan began his own secret search. He didn't know about the poison, not for certain, but he knew Ilara was a viper. He used his own network of scouts, old loyalists who trusted him over their false Lunar. For 7 years, he searched for a ghost, a servant girl with no name, no house, no status. It was an impossible task. He followed cold trails and false leads, his hope dwindling with each passing year. The kingdom was weakening, the pack was divided, and his alpha was a shell of the man he once was, slowly being consumed by a grief he couldn't even name. Brennan knew he was running out of time. He had to find her. He had to believe she was still out there. She was the only one who could save their king and their world. His search finally led him to a remote, nearly forgotten corner of the kingdom, a dense forest nestled in the foothills of the Dragon's Tooth Mountains. A tracker had mentioned a reclusive woman and a young boy who lived in an old woodcutter's cottage, a boy who was said to have eyes of pure gold. It was a sliver of a chance, a desperate hope, but it was all Brennan had left. He rode alone, pushing his horse through the overgrown forest, his heart a knot of dread and anticipation. As he drew closer, a scent hit him, faint but unmistakable, night-blooming jasmine. And beneath it, the scent of his alpha, the scent of the royal bloodline. He had found them. Brennan dismounted at the edge of the clearing, his heart pounding. The cottage was small, humble, with a curl of smoke rising from its stone chimney. It looked peaceful, but as he took a step forward, the scent of blood and death slammed into him. It was fresh. He drew his sword, his old soldier's instincts screaming. He broke into a run, bursting into the clearing just in time to see 3 men in dark cloaks, one of them aiming a crossbow at a small boy. He saw a woman, her back to him, collapse as a shield of pure moonlight flickered and died. "For the king!" Brennan roared, his voice the crack of doom. He was 1 wolf against 3, and he was no longer young, but he launched himself into the fray without a second's hesitation. He was the king's beta. His life was sworn to protect the alpha and his line. He met the first assassin with a clash of steel, his blade finding its mark in the man's chest. He parried a blow from the second, the force of it jarring his arm to the shoulder. He fought with the ferocity of a cornered wolf, a whirlwind of aging muscle and pure, unyielding loyalty. He managed to cut down the second assassin, but the third was faster. The man sidestepped Brennan's lunge and drove a wicked, serrated knife deep into the old wolf's side. A gasp of agony escaped Brennan's lips. His strength fled him, and he sank to 1 knee, his sword clattering on the stony ground. The assassin grinned, a flash of yellow teeth in the shadows of his hood. "The old dog's lost his bite," he snarled, raising his blade for the final blow. Brennan looked past him, at the woman lying so terribly still on the floor, and the golden-eyed boy frozen in terror. He had failed. Suddenly, the air itself seemed to split apart. A sound ripped through the forest, a howl of such profound rage and anguish that the very trees seemed to tremble. It was a sound of a soul being torn in two, a sound of a king who had found his stolen treasure only to see it threatened. From the dense woods at the edge of the clearing, a monster of shadow and fury erupted. It was a wolf, but a wolf of impossible size, a behemoth of black fur and rippling muscle, larger than any shifter Brennan had ever seen. Its eyes were not the eyes of a wolf or a man. They were twin pools of molten gold, burning with feral madness and absolute murderous intent. Alaric. The Alpha King, in his feral wolf form, covered the distance of the clearing in 2 impossible bounds. He didn't slow. He didn't hesitate. He slammed into the last assassin, and the man simply ceased to exist, vanishing under a tidal wave of black fur and snapping jaws. The wolf paid no mind to the dead men, no mind to the wounded Brennan. Its entire terrifying focus was on the cottage. It tore through the shattered doorway, its massive frame barely fitting, its rage a palpable force. Inside, the great wolf froze. Its burning golden eyes fell upon the still form of the woman on the floor. A low, guttural whine of pure agony rumbled in its massive chest. The rage vanished, replaced by a grief so profound it was a physical presence in the small room. Slowly, with a grace that defied its monstrous size, the wolf padded to her side. It nudged her with its huge snout, a gentle, questioning touch. There was no response. The whine grew louder, more desperate. It looked at the boy, Torin, who was pressed against the far wall, his own golden eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. The great wolf's gaze softened, a flicker of pained recognition within the feral madness. Then, with a sickening sound of shifting bones and tearing muscle, the wolf collapsed, shrinking, changing. In its place knelt Alaric. He was naked, his body still corded with the inhuman muscle of his other form, covered in the dust of travel and the blood of his enemies. His hair was long and wild, his face gaunt, but his eyes, his golden eyes, were fixed on Selena, and they were filled with a dawning horror and the heartbreaking, soul-shattering recognition. The fog in his mind, the poison's 7-year curse, was burning away in the fire of his grief. "Selena," he whispered. Her name, finally remembered, was a broken, ragged sound. He crawled to her, his movements clumsy with desperation. He reached out a trembling hand, hovering over her pale, still face. "You are alive," he breathed, the words a prayer. He touched her cheek. It was cold. A sob, thick and wrenching, tore from his chest. His gaze fell, tracing the lines of her body, and then he saw him. The boy, his son, the child with his own eyes, his own blood. He fell to his knees in the dust and splinters of the cottage floor. He looked from Selena's deathly pale face to the terrified, defiant face of his son. The truth crashed down on him with the weight of a collapsing mountain. The ghost he had been hunting, the missing piece of his soul, the source of his 7-year madness. It was her. It had always been her. And he had let them take her. He had let them break her. His trembling hand hovered over her still form. He couldn't bring himself to believe she was gone. He pressed his palm to her chest, right over her heart, desperate for a beat, a flicker, anything. As his skin touched hers, the frayed, damaged mate bond between them flared to life. It was no longer a dull ache, but a searing line of energy, a desperate lifeline. A faint warmth bloomed under his palm, and he felt it. A weak, thready pulse. It was almost nothing, but it was there. She was dying, but she wasn't dead. He looked at Torrin, who was watching him with wide, uncertain eyes. "May I?" Alaric whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears, gesturing not to Selene, but to the boy. He held out a hand, palm up. After a long, tense moment, Torrin took a hesitant step forward, then another. He slowly reached out and placed his small hand in Alaric's much larger one. The moment their skin touched, a jolt of recognition, of pure blood kinship, shot through Alaric. It was as real and undeniable as the mate bond. This was his son, his heir. The Alpha King, the feral beast who had torn his kingdom apart, knelt on the floor of a ruined cottage, holding the hand of the son he never knew he had, and wept. He wept for the 7 lost years, for the poison that had stolen his mind, and for the woman, his mate, his Selene, who lay dying because his enemies had found her before he could. If you believe that the love of a fated mate is a power that can conquer even death and madness, then please, show your support by hitting that like button. Subscribe for more tales of epic love and shifter destiny, and share this story with someone who knows that family is always worth fighting for. A low groan from the doorway drew Alaric's attention. Brennan. The old wolf was slumped against the frame, his hand pressed to the bloody wound in his side. His face was grey with pain. Alaric was on his feet in an instant, his grief momentarily eclipsed by the instinct to protect his pack. He crossed the room and knelt by his beta, his hands hovering over the wound, his expression grim. "Brennan, hold on." "My king," Brennan rasped, his breath shallow. "I found her. I'm sorry I was not stronger." "You were strong enough, old friend," Alaric said, his voice thick with emotion. "You brought me home." He looked at the deep gash. It was bad. Brennan was losing too much blood. Alaric was a warrior, a king, but he was no healer. His power was in breaking things, not mending them. Helplessness, a feeling he despised, washed over him. He had found his mate only to watch her die, and now his most loyal friend was bleeding out at his feet. "Father?" a small voice said from behind him. Alaric turned. Torin had moved to his mother's side. His small hand was resting on her forehead. "She's cold." The simple, childish statement was like a dagger to Alaric's heart. He looked at Selena, her life fading with every passing second. He looked at Brennan, whose breathing was growing ragged. He was going to lose them all. The rage began to build again, a useless, destructive fire with nowhere to go. Then another figure appeared in the ruined doorway. An old woman, her face a road map of wrinkles, carrying a leather satchel. She moved with a surprising swiftness, her sharp eyes taking in the entire scene in a glance. The dead assassins, the wounded beater, the kneeling king, and the dying woman on the floor. It was Marta, the pack healer. "Out of the way, Your Majesty," she said, her voice brooking no argument. She knelt beside Celine, her gnarled fingers immediately finding the pulse point in her neck. "Goddess preserve us. She used her core, pushed her life force into a shield." Marta looked up at Alaric, her expression grim. "This is not a wound of the body. Her spirit is guttering out like a candle in a storm. I can't heal this. No one can." "No!" Alaric roared, the sound more wolf than man. "I did not just find her again to lose her. There must be a way." Marta looked from Celine's pale face to Alaric's agonized one. "There is one thing," she said slowly, her gaze flickering to the burning mate bond that only they could feel, now a visible shimmer in the air between them. "The bond. It was damaged, but it is not broken. It is a conduit, a two-way street. She poured her life force out to protect the boy. You, Alpha King, must pour yours back in." "How?" Alaric demanded, his desperation palpable. "Take her hand. Find the bond in your soul, the one you've been chasing for 7 years. And push," Marta instructed. "Push your strength, your vitality, your will to live down that path and into her. But be warned," she added, her voice dropping to a solemn whisper. "It may cost you. It may drain you, weaken you. And if her spirit is too far gone, you will be pouring your strength into a vessel that can no longer hold it. You could lose yourself with her." Alaric didn't hesitate. The thought of living another moment in the empty hell of the last 7 years was far more terrifying than death. He knelt beside Celine again, Torin watching him with wide, silent eyes. He took her cold, limp hand in his, lacing their fingers together. He closed his eyes, shutting out the ruined cottage, the dead men, the dying friend. He focused inward, searching for that connection. He found it easily now. It was no longer a phantom ache, but a blazing pathway of silver light, frayed and damaged, but connecting his soul directly to hers. He remembered her scent, the feel of her skin, the sound of her laughter in the moonlit garden. He gathered all his formidable strength, his alpha vitality, the raw power that made him a king, and he pushed it all down that shimmering corridor of light. He felt it leave him, a torrent of golden energy flowing from his chest, down his arm, and into her. It felt like he was bleeding out, not blood, but life itself. The room began to spin. His head grew light. He could feel his own heartbeat slowing, his strength failing. He was emptying himself into her. He felt a flicker, a tiny spark in the darkness at the other end of the bond. It was her. Her spirit, faint and distant, but there. He pushed harder, pouring more of himself into her, anchoring her, refusing to let her drift away. "Come back to me, Celine," he pleaded, not with words, but with his soul. "Come back!" A soft gasp. Celine's eyelids fluttered. A hint of color, the barest blush of pink, returned to her cheeks. Her fingers, cold and limp in his, tightened their grip ever so slightly. She was coming back. The relief was so profound, so overwhelming, that Alaric almost collapsed. He had done it. He had pulled her back from the brink. He felt dizzy, drained, his own body trembling with exhaustion, but it was worth it. He opened his eyes. Selene was looking at him. Her eyes were hazy, unfocused, but she was looking at him. "Alaric?" she whispered, her voice a faint, fragile thing. "I'm here," he said, his own voice hoarse. "I'm here, and I'm not leaving you again." A soft cry from Torin broke the moment. "Mama!" The boy threw his arms around Selene's neck, burying his face in her shoulder. Selene's arm came up, weakly, to wrap around her son, holding him tight. Alaric watched them, his heart a painful mix of joy and regret. He had a family, a mate and a son, a family he had almost lost forever. His gaze shifted to Marta, who was now tending to Brennan, pressing a poultice of herbs into his wound. "He needs more than herbs," Alaric said, his voice still weak. Marta looked up, her expression strained. "The knife was likely poisoned. I can slow it, but I cannot stop it." Selene stirred. She looked at Brennan, at his pale face and labored breathing. She pushed herself up onto one elbow, her movements slow and unsteady. "The light," she murmured. I can try." "No," Alaric said immediately. "You'll kill yourself." "She might be right," Marta interrupted, her eyes wide with a dawning idea. "The power she used to create the shield was a raw, untamed force, protective. But that same power, the magic of a Lunar, the Moon Mother's gift, it can also be a healing light. Now that you have anchored her spirit with the bond, she is no longer pouring out her own life force. She can act as a conduit for yours." Alaric looked at Selene, at the determination in her eyes. She was weak, but she was not broken. He nodded slowly. "Tell me what to do." "Maintain the connection," Marta instructed. "Keep feeding her your strength." "Child," she said to Selene, "place your hand over Brennan's wound. Don't try to force the light, just let it flow. Let the Alpha's strength move through you and into him." Selene shuffled closer, Alaric supporting her back. She placed her free hand, the one that had glowed with moonlight, over Brennan's bloody side. Alaric felt the drain on him increase as Selene closed her eyes, her brow furrowed in concentration. Her palm began to glow again, not with the stark white light of the shield, but with a soft, warm, golden luminescence. It was Alaric's own strength, filtered through her, purified, transformed into a gentle, healing energy. The light sank into Brennan's wound. The old wolf, who had been shivering with pain and cold, went still. The grey, ashen color of his skin began to recede, replaced by a healthier tone. The ragged edges of the gash seemed to soften, to pull together under Selene's glowing hand. After a long minute, she slumped back against Alaric, her energy spent. The glow faded. Marta leaned in and checked Brennan's breathing. It was deeper now, more even. "The poison is neutralized," she breathed, her voice filled with awe. "The wound is already closing. By the goddess, I have never seen such a thing. The power of a true Alpha and Lunar, united. It is the pack's oldest magic." Alaric held Selene close, his heart full. She had saved his most loyal friend, using his own strength. They were two halves of a whole, more powerful together than they could ever be apart. He looked down at her, her head resting on his shoulder, and felt the last 7 years of cold, empty madness finally, truly come to an end. He was home. But the fight was far from over. He looked at the bodies of the assassins. They were a message. a declaration of war from his false queen.
Elara, he growled,
The name tasting like ash in his mouth.
She sent them.
She found out about the boy, Marta confirmed, her face grim. A trader passing through the village saw his eyes. The word must have gotten back to her. She would not tolerate a true heir to the Alpha bloodline.
She tried to kill my son,
Alaric snarled, his protective rage resurfacing, cold and sharp.
She drugged me. She stole my life, my mate, my son. She tried to murder your protector. She will pay for this.
Selene stirred, pushing herself upright. The infusion of Alaric's strength had worked. She was still weak, but the deathly exhaustion was gone, replaced by a steady warmth. What happened, Alaric? That night? You didn't know me. You looked right through me. Alaric's face tightened with shame and fury. He finally told her everything he could piece together. I did not choose her, he roared, the sound echoing in the small cottage. I was drugged, poisoned. I woke up 3 days later screaming your name, but I couldn't remember what it was. It was a ghost on my tongue. They told me I was mad from the wars. Elara, she tended to me, she soothed me, all while feeding the lie. For 7 years I have been a prisoner in my own mind, searching for you. He looked at Torin, who was now hiding shyly behind Selena, peering at the fearsome king who was his father. She stole 7 years of his life from me. She will not steal another second. He stood, pulling Selena up with him. He was a king again. The madness was gone, reforged into an unbreakable purpose. Marta, can Brennan ride? In an hour, he will be as fit as he was 20 years ago, Marta said, still looking at the near fully healed wound in amazement. Good, Alaric said. He walked to the center of the room and threw back his head, letting out a true Alpha command howl. It was not the howl of madness and pain he had been uttering for years. This was a summons. A call to arms that would be heard and obeyed by every loyal wolf in his territory. We are going back, he declared, his golden eyes blazing. We are going back to the capital. I am going to reclaim my throne, my pack, and my queen. And I will show them all what happens when you threaten an Alpha's family. The journey back to the capital was a stark contrast to Selene's flight 7 years prior. Then she had been alone, terrified and cloaked in darkness. Now she rode at the king's side, surrounded by a growing legion of his most loyal warriors. Alaric's summons howl had been answered. Wolves emerged from the forests and hills, their eyes filled with confusion that quickly turned to fierce loyalty as they saw their true Lunar beside their revitalized Alpha. They saw the golden-eyed boy riding before Alaric on his great warhorse, and they understood. The rumors, the whispers of a lost mate and a true heir, were real. Alaric never left her side. His presence was a constant warm shield. He had insisted she ride his own mount, sitting behind her, his arms a secure cage around her. One hand held the reins, the other rested possessively on her waist, his thumb stroking the spot on her hip where the mate mark lay, now a constant, pleasant warmth instead of an agonizing ache. He spoke to her in low tones, telling her of his 7 years of torment, the endless, frustrating search for a woman whose face he couldn't picture. He listened as she told him of her life in the cottage, of Torin's first steps, his first words, the constant fear she lived with. For every year of pain, they reclaimed a memory, weaving their 2 separate stories back into a single thread. Torin, after his initial fear, had quickly grown accustomed to the giant of a man who was his father. Alaric was endlessly patient with him, answering his barrage of questions about his warhorse, his sword, and the men who now followed them. Selene watched them together, her heart swelling. She saw Alaric showing Torin how to properly hold the reins, his large, calloused hands gentle over his son's small ones. She saw the open adoration in Alaric's eyes whenever he looked at the boy. He was not just a king reclaiming his heir, he was a father discovering his son. They arrived at the capital at dawn. They didn't sneak in, they marched. At the head of 200 of the pack's fiercest warriors, Alaric, Selene, and Torin rode through the main gates as the sun crested the mountains, bathing the white stone of the citadel in gold. The city guards, loyal to Elara and her house Van Thorn, formed a line, their spears leveled. They looked uncertain, seeing their feral king now clear-eyed and purposeful, with a woman and child at his side.
"You dare bar the way of your Alpha King?"
Alaric's voice boomed across the courtyard, imbued with an authority that left no room for question.
"I have returned to cleanse the rot from my court. Stand aside, or be swept away with it."
There was a tense moment of hesitation. Then one guard, then another, then the entire line lowered their spears and knelt. The true Alpha's command was an irresistible force. They marched unopposed into the heart of the castle, their boots echoing in the cavernous halls. They went directly to the great hall, the very place Selene's heart had been shattered. The doors were thrown open. Inside, the court was assembled. Lady Elara sat upon the twin throne next to Alaric's empty one, looking every bit the regal queen. When she saw Alaric, her face paled, but when her gaze fell on Selene, alive and whole beside him, and the golden-eyed boy he held protectively, her shock morphed into a mask of pure, venomous fury. "Alaric, you're back," she said, her voice a silky performance of relief. She rose and glided toward him. "We were so worried." "This woman," she said, her eyes flicking to Selene with utter contempt. "What is this? Has she addled your mind again?" Alaric didn't even look at her. His eyes were on the assembled pack members, the elders and lords who had allowed this viper to rule in his name. "My mind has never been clearer, Elara," he said, his voice dangerously calm. He dismounted and lifted Torin to the ground, placing him gently behind Selene's legs. Then he turned his full, wrathful attention on the false queen. "You stand in the presence of Selene, my fated mate, your true Lunar," he announced, his voice ringing with power. "And this," he placed a hand on Torin's head, "is my son and heir, Torin." A collective gasp went through the hall. Elara laughed, a high, brittle sound. "You have gone mad. He brings a servant girl and her bastard into the great hall and calls them queen and heir. She is a nobody, a whore who fled her duties years ago. The boy is proof of her infidelity." "She fled because your assassins were on her heels," Alaric roared, taking a step forward. "Just as your assassins came for them 2 days ago." He gestured to Brennan, who stepped forward, his face grim. "They tried to murder my beta. They tried to murder my son." "Lies!" Elara shrieked, her composure finally cracking. "He is sick. His mind is gone. He's been living like an animal in the woods. How can you believe him?" She appealed to the pack elders, her allies. "I have ruled this pack in his absence. I have held us together while he howled at the moon." The hall descended into chaos, lords shouting, pack members unsure of who to believe. Elara was right. Alaric's madness was legendary. But the power rolling off him now was not madness. It was pure, controlled alpha authority. And the woman beside him, she held herself with a quiet, regal dignity. The boy's golden eyes were undeniable proof of his bloodline. Selene felt the fear and confusion of the pack. She knew this was her moment. She stepped forward, away from the protective wall of Alaric's body. "He is not sick," she said, her voice clear and steady, carrying across the hall. "He was poisoned." She looked directly at Elara. "On the night of the choosing, 7 years ago, you drugged his wine. You used a wolfsbane compound to sever his mind from his mate bond, to steal his memories of me, so that he would choose you." Ilara's face went white. "Preposterous accusations from a desperate tramp. Seize her!" she commanded her personal guard. But before they could move, Ilara did something desperate. She saw old Marta, the healer, standing near the dais, her face a mask of condemnation. Marta knew. Marta had been there. In a flash, Ilara moved, grabbing the old woman and pulling her back, a small, wickedly sharp silver dagger appearing in her hand, pressed against Marta's throat. "Enough of this farce!" Ilara screamed, her eyes wild. "I am the Lunar of this pack. I will not be usurped by a serving wench and her spawn. You will all stand down, or the old crone dies." The hall fell silent. Alaric froze, his face a thunderous mask of rage, but he couldn't risk Marta's life. Ilara smiled, feeling control slide back into her grasp. She looked at Selene, her eyes glittering with hatred. "What will you do now, little servant? Beg for your friend's life?" Her gaze darted to Torin, who was clinging to Selene's leg, his small body trembling. A cruel, terrible idea sparked in Ilara's mind. She would end this, right here, right now. She would destroy the source of all her problems. In a blur of motion, she shoved Marta away and lunged, not for Selene, but for the boy. "I should have killed you when you were just a rumor," she shrieked, the silver dagger aimed straight at Torin's heart. It was her fatal mistake. She attacked the child in front of the mother. The universe contracted to that single horrifying moment. Selene saw the flash of silver, the hate in Ilara's eyes, the terror on her son's face. The protective instinct that had governed her life for 7 years didn't just fracture this time. It exploded. Pain exploded. Not from a wound, but from within. It was a glorious, terrifying agony, the feeling of her very bones breaking and reforming. Golden light, brighter than the sun, flooded the great hall, pouring from Selene's body in a blinding wave. A raw, inhuman scream tore from her throat as her form twisted and grew. Where Selene, the servant girl, the hidden mother, had stood, a wolf now towered. It was a creature of myth, a wolf as large as Alaric's own feral form, with a coat of pure, brilliant white, like moonlight given solid form. Its eyes were not gold, but a burning ancient amber. A primeval power, the dormant magic of the first Lunars, rolled off her in palpable waves, silencing the entire hall with its sheer, breathtaking majesty. She was the White Wolf, the Moon Mother incarnate. She caught the silver dagger with a clawed hand, just inches from Torin's chest. The blade, deadly to shifters, shattered against her enchanted claws. Ilara stared, her face slack with disbelief and terror, at the mythical beast that stood before her. The White Wolf opened her jaws, filled with teeth like ivory daggers, and let out a roar that was not a sound, but a judgment. It slammed into Ilara, throwing her back as if she'd been struck by lightning. She landed in a heap at the foot of the throne she had coveted for so long. Terrified and cornered, Ilara's sanity finally snapped. "I did it for us!" she screamed, her voice raw and hysterical, pointing a trembling finger at the empty throne beside her. "I did it for the pack! I poisoned him so he would forget you! You were a weakness he couldn't afford!" She had admitted it. in front of the entire pack, the elders, the lords, and the warriors. The truth was out, confessed from her own lips. The great white wolf turned her head, her amber eyes scanning the shocked faces of the pack. There was no challenge. There was only awe and reverence. She had saved the heir. She had revealed the traitor. She was their queen. Then her gaze fell on Alaric, who was staring at her, his golden eyes filled not with fear, but with utter, soul-deep love and wonder. She met his gaze, and then, with a soft whine, she padded to her son, nudging him gently with her massive snowy head, assuring him she was there, that he was safe. The crisis was over. The reclamation was complete. The aftermath was swift and decisive. There was no trial. Ilara's public confession had sealed her fate. Before the stunned court, Alaric, with his true Lunar in her awe-inspiring wolf form at his side, delivered his judgment. Death would have been a mercy she didn't deserve. Instead, he stripped her and House Van Thorn of all titles, lands, and rank. Ilara, the woman who craved power and status above all else, was rendered a nobody, an Omega with no pack to claim her. She was exiled, banished to the barren marches in the north, a desolate, frozen wasteland where only the toughest outcasts could hope to survive. It was a fate worse than death for a wolf, a sentence of utter solitude. Her co-conspirators were dealt with just as swiftly, exiled or stripped of their positions, the rot of their influence carved out of the pack hierarchy with surgical precision. As Ilara was dragged away, weeping and cursing, the great hall, which had been silent in awe, erupted, not with the polite applause of court, but with a visceral, heartfelt howl of fealty. One by one, from the oldest elder to the youngest warrior, the wolves of the Black Moon pack knelt, their heads bowed not just to their restored king, but to the magnificent white wolf who stood as his equal. They howled their allegiance to their true Lunar, the Moon Mother who had returned to them. The immense power that had flooded Selene receded, leaving a deep, bone-weary exhaustion in its wake. The brilliant white form wavered, and with a soft groan she shifted back, collapsing into her human shape. Alaric was there in an instant, catching her before she hit the ground, sweeping her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing. He ignored the bowing court, his entire world narrowed to the woman in his arms. He carried her from the great hall, with Torrin trailing closely behind, his small hand clutching the edge of Alaric's tunic. Brennan, his wound now nothing more than a faint pink line, cleared the way, his face a mask of grim satisfaction. Alaric took her not to a guest chamber, but to the Lunar's suite, adjoining his own royal chambers. A suite that had remained empty and cold for 7 long years. He laid her gently on the vast bed with its furs and silk sheets. She looked small and fragile against the grandeur of the room, but he knew the truth. She possessed a strength that rivaled his own. He dismissed the hovering attendants, wanting to be alone with his family. He sat on the edge of the bed, his hand finding hers. Torrin, after a moment's hesitation, climbed up onto the bed and snuggled against his mother's side, his earlier terror forgotten, replaced by a deep, instinctual need for her presence. "I never knew," Selene whispered, her eyes fluttering open. "That power, that wolf, I never knew it was inside me." "It is the legacy of your bloodline," Marta's voice said from the doorway. The old healer entered, carrying a tray with steaming broth and tea. "Your grandmother's grandmother was the last white wolf. It is a magic that lies dormant, awakening only when the pack is in mortal peril, and a true alpha stands with his mate. It is the goddess's own blessing." Alaric looked at her, at the raw, untamed power he had witnessed, and felt a reverence that went beyond the mate bond. "You saved us," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved our son.
You saved our pack. We saved each other, she corrected softly, her fingers tightening around his. They spent the next few days in the sanctuary of the royal chambers. The kingdom could wait. For the first time in 7 years, they were simply a family. Alaric would spend hours just watching Selene and Torin, a look of profound wonder on his face, as if he couldn't quite believe they were real. He learned that his son loved honeycakes, that he was scared of spiders, and that he had a laugh that could light up the entire room. He and Selene talked for hours, filling in the gaps of their stolen years, rediscovering the easy intimacy they had once shared. The bond between them settled, no longer a frantic, aching thing, but a deep, steady, and unbreakable river of warmth and light that connected them, heart and soul. One evening, as Torin slept soundly in his own adjoining room for the first time, Alaric led Selene out onto the balcony overlooking the sleeping city. The full moon hung in the sky, bathing the world in a familiar, silvery glow. "The bond is strong," Alaric said, turning to face her. He took both of her hands in his. "But it is not yet complete. The pack has accepted you. My heart has belonged to you since the moment I first saw you. But the final right, it must be your choice." Selene looked into his golden eyes, seeing her past, her present, and her future reflected there. She saw the fierce alpha king, the tender father, and the man whose soul was the other half of her own. She raised a hand to his face, her thumb tracing the line of his jaw. There was no fear, no hesitation, only certainty. "Claim me," she whispered, baring her throat in a gesture of ultimate trust and surrender. "Make it complete." Alaric's eyes darkened with emotion and primal need. He lowered his head, his lips brushing against her skin, his breath warm. "And you, me," he whispered back against her neck, baring his own throat in return. It was the ultimate sign of respect, of equality. He was an alpha, but he was hers as much as she was his. She sank her teeth into the junction of his neck and shoulder. A jolt of pure energy, of completion, surged through her. He let out a low growl of pleasure and possession, and then his own fangs extended. He bit down gently on the spot she had offered, not a bite of pain, but of sealing, a final, indelible mark of ownership and belonging. The bond flared, a supernova of silver light in their souls, and then settled, perfect and whole. Two halves of a soul became one. In the months that followed, the Black Moon Pack thrived as it never had before. The madness of their king was replaced by the wise and just rule of an Alpha and Lunar united. Alaric, with Selene's counsel, ushered in a new era of prosperity and fairness, breaking down the old, rigid class structures that had allowed someone like Ilara to rise so high. Selene embraced her role as Lunar, her innate compassion and hidden strength making her beloved by the people. Her dormant power, now under her control, brought a sense of peace and security to the pack. Torin grew up not just as a prince, but as a happy, well-adjusted boy, adored by his parents and the entire pack. He had his father's strength and his mother's kind heart, and his golden eyes held the promise of a bright future. One evening, a year after their return, Alaric, Selene, and Torin stood on that same balcony, looking out at their peaceful kingdom. Torin stood between them, holding both of their hands. Selene was pregnant again, her belly a gentle curve beneath her gown, a new life and a new promise for their family and their pack. Alaric wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close, his hand resting on her stomach. He leaned down and pressed a kiss to her temple, his heart full to bursting. He had torn the world apart looking for a ghost, and in return, the goddess had given him back his soul, a son, and a kingdom reborn. He was finally, completely home.
And that is how the rejected servant became the Alpha Queen. From a broken heart to a throne, Celine's story proves that you can't fight fate, and that the power of a mother's love can bring even the strongest kingdom to its knees, only to raise it back up again, stronger than before. If you believe that true love is worth burning a kingdom down for, smash that like button. Subscribe for more epic shifter romances where destiny cannot be denied. And tell us in the comments, what dormant power do you think you would have if you were a secret queen?